Milan with white opens with pawn to d4. Alexander replies with knight to s6. We have pawn to c4, e6 and knight to c3. And Arja's bishop to b4. Alekhine goes for the Nimzo-Indian defense. We have queen to c2. And now this is the classical variation we see at even now in 2025. Pretty much every year on the 1st of January when I make a video, I mess up the year, but no, it's 2025. We have pawn to d5 and a3. Other moves can also be played nowadays. In those days, a3 was by far the most popular. Bishop captures, queen captures, so there's no reason for Milan to mess up his pawn structure. So queen captures, and now Alekhine goes knight to e4 and puts pressure on the queen. And yes, you shouldn't really move the same piece twice in the opening, but it's okay if it comes with a tempo, because white will also now waste a tempo. And even in modern times, it has been played. For example, Magnus Carlsen played this move against Wesley, so their game ended in a draw. And, some time before that, Kasparov, for example, even won a game against Vladimir Kramnik with this knight to e4 move. Okay, queen back to c2, knight to c6. Nowadays, c5 is more popular. We have knight to c5, knight to c6, e3, and pawn to e5. Immediately, Alekhine strikes in the center, pawn to f3, chasing away the knight, and also making room for the king on f2, so you're not necessarily castling this game. Knight to f6, we have c captures on d5, queen captures, and bishop to c4, nicely developing with tempo. Queen to d6 by Alexander, and now d captures on e5. There are a couple of games that reached this position after this game was played that continued in a different fashion, some like knight e2, but after d captures on e5, it is as of move 12 that this position has never been reached again. And okay, Alekhine recaptures, knight captures on e5, and bishop to d2, saying that, okay, maybe you castle kingside, and then I can go for something like bishop to b4, and that's exactly what Alekhine does. And it's not really that you're going to win material, because there's pawn to c5 always. Bishop to b4, we have pawn to c5, you have to play it if you don't want to lose material, and rook to d1, attacking Alekhine's queen, queen to c6, and now bishop back to d2. And now here comes a really, well, not sort of a bolt out of the blue, but also a move that makes Alekhine one of the greatest attackers ever. Bishop to f5, just not wasting time. He's giving up the bishop to claim the bishop on c4. We have queen captures on c5. If you don't play that, just rook f d8, and, white's position is, on the brink of destruction. So queen captures on f5, we have knight captures on c4, now putting pressure on that b2 pawn, and the position is still playable. However, what would you play here? I mean, you have this position, okay, you're kind of hoping maybe you play king f2 to develop the knight to get the rook into the game. Or maybe you don't do that at all, maybe you just play king f2, maybe some h4, h5, maybe something like this. There are so many ways that you can go wrong here, and there's only one good way to play it, and the only good way to play it is queen back to c2. It defends the pawn this way. However, in the game, bishop to c1 was played, and this gives Alekhine an idea. He plays rook f to e8, okay, putting pressure on that e3 pawn, and no problem, king to f2, just nicely defending. We have rook to e6, Alekhine says, alright, I'm ready to double up on the e-file, and now again, queen to c2 is the move that Milan should play, but he goes knight to h3, and now it's, I'm pretty sure you guys see it, but just for fun, if you don't see it, scout to the position a little bit. What would you play here? The only move that gives Alekhine advantage, and of course the move that you guys saw, is knight to e4 with check. And it makes perfect sense. Of course the knight cannot be captured, as rook to f6 would win the white queen. There's a king on that f2 square. So king to e1, and now knight e to d6. Attacking the queen, we have queen to d3, but now the stage has been set, and it's up to Alekhine to start sacrificing material. And he goes for it. Knight captures on e3. Okay, it looks a bit silly. You are defending the square twice, so bishop captures on e3, and now how to continue pawn to c4. It's even interesting that Alekhine, although he can just, we can even show it, he can play captures, and rook d8, and of course, I mean, he is the world champion, of course he sees that he can win the queen, but he decided that it was maybe a bit too dangerous, maybe some rook d8 action, maybe somehow this rook gets into the game, and you're not going to be able to win. And indeed, with perfect play, maybe Alekhine can win this. Probably he can, but he decided against it. He played pawn to c4, first trying to chase away the queen from the defense of the bishop on e3, queen to d5, offering a queen trade, and now rook captures on e3. We have king to f2, and now queen captures on d5, rook captures on d5, and now rook to d3. Offering a trade of rooks, rook captures, c captures, creating a passed pawn, and now rook to d1. And although so far we are only at move 28, this game can be considered an attacking game, as can pretty much any game that features Alexander Alekhine. But this game is actually a part of, well, if you were a book writer about chess books in those days or even in modern days, you will feature this game on how to play the endgame. And now you'll see why. So okay, the pawn is hanging. Alekhine strikes with knight to c4. He wants to trade his d pawn for the b pawn. And well, usually advancing the b pawn is the way to go. Here it would only mean giving up the a pawn. So we have a trade. Rook captures, knight captures, and rook to b3, attacking the knight, and also the b7 pawn. So Alekhine goes knight to c4. He says, all right, we trade. Rook captures, knight captures, and now we have this position where Alekhine is up a pawn, and it's a passed a pawn. But still, it's a very tricky endgame. Can Alekhine win this? Knight to g5, and Alekhine starts advancing his passed pawn. We have knight captures on f7, equalizing in material. Pawn to a4, we have knight to d6, and now rook to b2. Knight to c2 first, and rook to b2. Going after the knight, we have pawn to a3, and there is nothing more that you can do here. Interestingly, the position is still not winning for Alekhine, but he has to give up the exchange. Of course, if you go rook a2 the night before, and after you move the rook a2, and okay, knight c2 will win the game easily. So after pawn to a3, rook captures on c2, we have a2, and now you have to give up the rook. Rook captures on a2, and rook captures on a2 with check. King to g3, and now king to f8. And again, so we reach a sort of a third part of the game. So we had the grand middle game, and then we had the first part of the end game, and this can be considered, due to a serious change in the structure, sort of a third part of the end game. And how can you play this? White is up a pawn, but black is up the exchange, and we have pawn to h4. Okay. Definitely grabbing more space. King to e7 attacks the knight, knight to e4, and now pawn to h6. We have knight to f2, and king to e6. And there is nothing for Dr. Milan Vidmar to try here. He can just, remaneuver the knight back and forth and see if Alekhine can somehow win the game. And theoretically, how would you even win this? I mean, you cannot really touch this pawn. Even if you somehow get your king over to h5, it's very easy to play knight to g4, and the rook will be useless. There's no way to do that. So the only way to do it would be to get the king all the way to f1, and then you can put pressure on the knight on f2, and also if the knight moves, to that pawn on g2. So that is mostly what you are looking for here. Now let's see how Alekhine plays it. Okay, first knight to d3 by Milan, king to f5, and now knights back to f4. We have rook to a4, putting pressure on the knight, knight to d3, and now rook to c4. We have knight to f2, and rook to c6. Okay, knights to h3, we have king to e5, and now pawn to h5, rook to c2, and now knights to f4. And here we have rook to d2, sort of a waiting move, not allowing knights to d3 with check. And the question is, what do you play here? It's such a beautiful position, and it's hard to emphasize even how strong a move rook to d2 is, because it's not the winning move. The winning move for Alekhine was actually king to f5 here. But okay, after rook to d2, it's still possible to save the game for Dr. Milan Vidmar. But how would you save it? What would you play? And what is there to play even? Is there anything you can move? You cannot move the king. What can you do? King to g4, just rook to d4, and you lose the knight. You cannot move any of the pawns. So it's basically, where do you go with the knight? That is the question. And here, knight to h3 was played, which loses the game. The way to play this is knight to g6, and now if Alekhine tries to bring the king over to f1 like we've discussed, you're just going to play knight to h4, and you have everything covered. The knight defends the pawn, the king defends the pawn, and, if at any point this pawn gets under attack, you can easily just defend it, so it's not a problem. So that was the way to do it. Unfortunately, this was played in 1930. I do not have the clock times, so, could be anything. Knight to h3, and now king to d4. We have knight to f4, and now king to e3. Knight to e6, and now rook to d5, putting pressure on the h5 pawn. And there really isn't any more that you can try. It seems like knight captures, wins material, and the guards the h5 pawn. The rook to g5 check picks up the knight, and you would resign here. So after rook d5, pawn to f4 was played. Rook to f5 now. Putting white in zugzwang, or rather preparing to put white in zugzwang. You can't really move anything, otherwise rook captures will win the first pawn, and then all of the pawns will fall. So rook to king to g4 was played. Rook to f6 now, chasing away the knight. We have pawn to f5 rather than giving up the pawn on f4. And now rook to f7. We have pawn to g3. And king to e4. We have knight to c5 with check, and king to d4, attacking the knight b3 check, and king to e5. And he was in this position on move 57 that Dr. Milan Vidmar resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So after almost 20 years, it is once again Alekhine who is in the lead. Like I said, he won their first game ever in 1911 in Carlsbad, and then it took him, well, like I said, almost 20 years to win a second game against Dr. Milan Vidmar. That's how strong he was. Even though chess was not his entire life, he was all around. He was a jack of all trades, but still. You really had to fight hard to take him down, and that is exactly what Alekhine did in this game and in this entire tournament, basically, as you've seen his results. And if you want to see how you can easily win this, well, okay, whatever white plays doesn't really matter. The pawn will fall, and now it's, equal pawns, rook versus knight, so that is winning. A couple of more moves will be played, something like king f6, knight to d4, you can attack the rook, rook c5, knight e2, or rather, rook c5, knight e2, king to e5, and now let's say knight f4. You're trying to, prevent the rook from countering some pawns here, but just king e4. And after, let's say, knight to g6, you will finally go rook g5 with check, and after king to h4, king f3, and that's it. There's nothing that you can do. The pawn will fall, and then the rest is, very simple. Of course, both you and your uncle would easily win this one, even against the best player in the world.